I'm joined now by Conor D'arcy from the Resolution Foundation. So, Conor, just to be clear, you're talking about people who work for platforms like Uber and Deliveroo, not necessarily all self-employed people.
That's the idea. So if you call up a plumber, say, and you look them up online and they work for themselves, they obviously, they can't pay themselves the minimum wage. It doesn't really mean anything. But if they're working for, say, a plumbing company, and the plumbing company tells them you have to charge this amount for this type of work, then they don't have control over the price they set. So we're saying that for firms in that position who use self-employed labour, they should be guaranteeing that the people that they're giving this work to are getting at least the minimum wage.
Isn't the danger of this that it's going to put an awful lot more of a workload on HMRC because they're going to have to administer this and make sure that these companies are paying the minimum wage?
I think you wouldn't want it to be checked in absolutely every instance, and you would need to expand the funding for HMRC. But I think the important thing in this is to make sure that the firms are accepting this duty, that they would have to go and do this test to make sure that the rates that they're paying for the type of work that they're offering would actually give the minimum wage to someone. And then if there's cases where it doesn't look like it's being paid, then that's where HMRC can get involved and investigate.
And remind us what the status is of Uber drivers right now. There's a case going through the courts at the moment. I mean, are they classed currently as self-employed still?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really important, but also quite complex. So you've got Uber drivers, and in the latest case they were found to be workers. And workers are a type of self-employed person, but they are entitled to the minimum wage. So obviously, that'll play out. Firms can change the working relationship to move them closer to self-employment. But we're saying that, obviously the gig economy gets a lot of attention, but there's lots of other kinds of self-employed workers who are truly independently self-employed, but take some work from companies. I mentioned plumbers, but there's also instances like hairdressers where they're renting a chair, as they call it, in a salon with less control. So we're saying that, there's these really important tribunals that are going through. They're crucial, and getting better enforcement is vital. But also, giving a basic kind of floor for the wages of a lot of people would make a big difference.
Isn't the problem, though, that the essence of self-employed work, it's essentially about doing a job rather than necessarily the hours that you're paid to do it. And if you push up the price of doing the job by hiking up an hourly rate, some people aren't going to want to take on those services anymore.
This is the argument that we had with the minimum wage initially, that people worried that if you gave it to employees, then you'd risk, either damaging their employment risk or, you'd make food and basic kind of goods more expensive. What we found is that there's been some kind of pass-through from the minimum wage to prices, but there hasn't been an effect on employment, and it hasn't really massively changed things. And the approach that we're taking is, saying not just paying self-employed people by the hour, but when they're doing the task. So when they're couriers, when they're on a delivery, if they're an Uber driver, when they're driving, making sure that they have that at least minimum guarantee.
So you're going to call for these kind of people to get holiday pay as well and sick pay, things like that?
Well, I think there's a bigger argument to be had around how we treat the self-employed, and I think there's definitely some other rights that we could extend to them, like statutory maternity pay, which they don't get at the moment. And the Taylor Review is going to take a broader look at this. But I think for the moment we're just focusing on the minimum wage. But one of the most important things we could do, and that the government's looked at before, is starting to equalise the tax treatment. Because at the moment there's a big incentive for both the self-employed person and the firm to say they're self-employed, whether or not that's true. So trying to even up the playing field on that would help to get rid of some of this bogus self-employment.
Right, so that was Philip Hammond's attempt to equalise national insurance rates for the self-employed and the employed. So you're in favour of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, because it's not the lowest earning self-employed people that get affected by that. It's a lot of the growth in self-employment recently has been in higher paid sectors. So potentially there's a basic fairness point in the tax system, but then there's also how do we get money in at this point when everyone's talking about austerity and finding a bit of money to spend elsewhere?
Quite so. I mean, some would say, why not just hit the companies themselves harder? Why not impose greater legislation on them?
So I think, there's the employee or self-employed NICs. There's class 2 and class 4 and class 1. But there's also this employer NICs, which is the big difference, because firms who are using self-employed labour don't have to pay this nearly 14% tax. So trying to, maybe bring that in is something that we'd start to move in that direction. But for a government to do that, obviously it's quite politically brave, so we'll have to see if something happens on that.
All right, Conor D'arcy from the Resolution Foundation. Appreciate you joining me. It's a complicated issue. Explained it well, I think. Thanks.